July 13th, 1863, 10:30 in the morning, 3rd Avenue and 47th Street, Manhattan. A pistol shot cracked through the summer air. Then the doors of the 9th District Provost Marshal's office exploded inward. 40 men, their faces twisted with fury, their fists wrapped around iron bars and wooden clubs, stormed inside and went straight for the rotating draft lottery wheel. They smashed it to pieces. They shattered the windows. They scattered the enrollment papers like confetti across the floor. And then they did the one thing that changed everything. They set the building on fire. The men who started the most violent urban insurrection in American history were not gangsters. They were not soldiers. They were volunteer firefighters. The men of Engine Company Number 33. The Black Joke. This wasn't some ragtag crew of amateurs. The Black Joke was one of the most feared, most respected, and most violent fire companies in the history of New York City. For 3 decades, they had brawled their way across lower Manhattan, fighting rival engine companies with their fists and fighting fires with a ferocity that bordered on madness. They were heroes. They were thugs. They were arsonists dressed as firemen. And on that hot Monday morning in July of 1863, they lit the match that burned New York City to the ground. 120 people dead, over $1.5 million in property destroyed, 233 orphaned children forced to run for their lives through a mob of thousands. 4 days of absolute hell, and it started with the men who were supposed to protect the city. This is the story of the Black Joke Engine Company Number 33. How a floating fire engine became a land-based gang. How volunteer firemen became political weapons. How the men trusted to save New York became the ones who nearly destroyed it. And how one of the most important stories in American history got reduced to a single line of dialogue in a Martin Scorsese film. But here's what nobody talks about. The same men who started the riots also fought to stop them. The same company that smashed the draft wheel also rushed back to save neighboring tenements from the fire they had just set. The Black Joke didn't fit neatly into the category of hero or villain. They were both. And that is what makes this story unlike anything else in the gangs of New York era. To understand how firemen became arsonists, you have to understand what firefighting actually looked like in New York City before the Civil War, because it looked nothing like what you imagine. There was no fire department, not in any way you would recognize. There was no 911, no dispatch, no centralized command. What New York City had, from the colonial era all the way through 1865, was a system of volunteer fire companies. And these companies were, in every meaningful sense, street gangs with water pumps. Here is how it worked. A fire breaks out somewhere in Manhattan. An alarm goes up. Every volunteer company within earshot hears it and races to the scene. Not to cooperate, to compete. The first company to get water pumping at a fire earned the payout from the insurance company that covered the building. So these crews would sprint through the streets, hauling their hand-pumped engines by rope, fighting through traffic and crowds, trying to beat every other company to the hydrant. And if 2 companies arrived at the same time, they did not share. They fought. Fist fights, club fights, knife fights, while the building burned. You have to understand the scale of this. These were not small scraps between a handful of guys. Augustine Costello, the fire department historian, described one brawl where 1,000 men were grappling in the streets. He wrote that the fighters were so thick there was scarcely any room to fall. 1,000 firefighters, fist to fist, while flames consumed the very building they were supposed to save. That was the system. That was normal. And the gangs loved it. The Dead Rabbits, the Bowery Boys, the Pug Uglies, they all infiltrated the volunteer firehouses because the firehouses offered 3 things every street gang craved: political connections, community respect, and a legitimate excuse to carry axes in public. A man in a fire company uniform could walk through any neighborhood in the city without being questioned. He could carry tools that doubled as weapons. He could build a reputation as a protector. And he could turn that reputation into votes. This is where the Black Joke enters the picture. Engine Company Number 33 was born sometime in the mid-1830s as a floating engine. That is exactly what it sounds like. A fire pump mounted on a barge anchored off the battery at the southern tip of Manhattan, used to fight fires on ships and along the waterfront. The original crew spent their days bobbing on the harbor, waiting for a ship to catch fire. It was boring. There was nobody to fight. So the men of Number 33 did what any self-respecting New York fire company would do. They came ashore. The company set up its land engine near Corlear's Hook on the Lower East Side, and within months, Black Joke became notorious. The nickname came from a sloop that had distinguished itself during the War of 1812, an Albany-built vessel that captured several British ships. But the name carried another layer. The Black Joke was also a bawdy song from 18th century England, well known in the taverns and docks of Lower Manhattan. The men of Number 33 knew exactly what they were naming themselves. Something bold, something provocative, something that told every other company in the city exactly who they were dealing with. The membership of Black Joke tells you everything about their character. These were not gentlemen playing at civic duty. They were ship carpenters, caulkers, spar makers, men who worked with their hands along the waterfront, whose bodies were hardened by physical labor, whose idea of recreation involved bare-knuckle fighting and political brawling. Tom Secor, one of the early members, once fought a prize fight against Yankee Sullivan on Staten Island. Secor was not unusual. He was typical. The unwritten rule of Black Joke was simple. If you could not hold your own in a hand-to-hand fight, you could not be a member. Period. They also attracted men of ambition. George Steers, the famous shipbuilder who would go on to design the yacht America, the vessel that gave the America's Cup its name, served as an active member. Steers once got the entire company into a street brawl after he beat a man senseless for insulting American shipping. The whole crew backed him without hesitation. Laird, the prominent iron founder, was another member. These were not nobodies. These were men who built things and broke things with equal enthusiasm. Black Joke's closest ally was Engine Number 30, housed on Christie Street near Stanton. The two companies hunted together. That is the word the historical accounts use. Hunted. They hunted fires and they hunted fights, prowling the streets of the Lower East Side together like wolves, working in pairs. Their enemies were Peterson Engine Number 15, housed on Christie Street near Canal, and Live Oak Engine Number 44, based in East Houston Street near Columbia, in the area known as the Island, because it was surrounded on all sides by water. Here is where it gets interesting. All four of these companies drew their membership from the same trade: ship carpenters, caulkers, spar makers, men who knew each other, men who worked the same docks, men whose fathers might have been friends. That familiarity did not breed affection. It bred the kind of hatred that only comes from people who are too alike. They fought in pairs. 15 and 44 against 30 and 33. That was the usual arrangement. But one afternoon, Black Joke came home from a fire without its ally, Engine 30, which had gone to a different blaze. Unfortunately, both 15 and 44 had gone to the same fire as Black Joke. Coming home, the three companies met on the street. Black Joke did not hesitate. Outnumbered 2-1, they attacked Engine 15. When they started winning, 44 jumped in. Any reasonable company would have retreated. Black Joke was not reasonable. They fought both companies simultaneously, outnumbered and outflanked, and fought so desperately that they held their own. They did not win, but they refused to lose, and in the world of the volunteer fire companies, that was better than a victory. That story spread through every firehouse in the city within a week. But here is the thing about reputations built on violence. They attract attention from people who deal in power. By the 1840s, every major political faction in New York had realized that volunteer fire companies were the most valuable political asset in the city. A fire company controlled a neighborhood. Its members were known. They were trusted. They could deliver votes, and they could intimidate anyone who tried to vote the wrong way. The most famous example was William McGeer Tweed. Before he was Boss Tweed, before Tammany Hall, before he stole an estimated $50 to $200 million from the city of New York, he was a volunteer firefighter. In 1848, Tweed organized the America's Fire Company No. 6, known as the Big Six. He wore a red shirt. He ran his crew like a military unit, and he used that crew as the foundation for the most corrupt political machine in American history. Every volunteer fire company in the city was watching, and every one of them understood the lesson. Firefighting was not about fires. It was about power. Peter Masterson learned that lesson better than most. Masterson was an Irish immigrant who came to New York and became a building contractor. He was also a brawler, and he was ambitious. When Black Joke was revived after being disbanded, Masterson took over as foreman and turned the company into his personal political vehicle. He served in the state legislature for 2 years. He sat as a Democratic alderman for 4 years. He became an influential trustee of the Benevolent Fund. And his engine number 33 became direct rivals with Tweed's Big Six. You need to sit with that for a moment. 2 volunteer fire companies, supposedly in the business of putting out fires, were operating as rival political factions. Their crews would arrive at the same fire and, instead of fighting the flames, fight each other for the insurance payout and the political credit. Sometimes the building would burn to the ground while the 2 companies brawled in the street, and sometimes, when a fire company wanted to send a message, they would set the fire themselves. Firemen who became arsonists. The fox guarding the hen house and eating every chicken inside. Black Joke's political nature showed itself most dramatically in the 1840s and 50s, during the rise of the Know-Nothing movement. The Know-Nothings, formerly the Native American Party, built their entire platform on hatred of immigrants, particularly the Irish. Black Joke's membership was overwhelmingly Irish. They did not take kindly to the Know-Nothings. One day, returning from a fire near Chatham Square on the Bowery, the Black Joke Company encountered a Know-Nothing procession. A parade of people who believed Irish immigrants did not belong in America, marching down the Bowery, right past a fire company full of Irish men carrying axes. The men of Black Joke set down their tow rope. They walked directly into the Know-Nothing procession, and they beat them senseless. The accounts describe it as absolute chaos. The Know-Nothings tried to resist. They could not. Black Joke in that kind of fight was, as one contemporary put it, resistless. There was no more popular demonstration in favor of native-born citizens that day. The morning papers destroyed them. Public opinion turned against the Black Joke. The attack was seen as what it was, a flagrant violation of freedom and a breach of city ordinance. The case went before the Fire and Water Committee of the Board of Aldermen, which served the function that fire commissioners would later fill. Black Joke was found guilty and disbanded. The company ceased to exist. But here is where it gets interesting. You cannot kill an identity that strong. Years passed. An attempt was made to revive the company. It failed. More years passed. Then Peter Masterson stepped in, and this time the revival stuck. Under Masterson, Black Joke was reborn. New engine house near 58th Street and Broadway. Same attitude, same violence. Same political ambition. And now the country was tearing itself apart over something much bigger than fire insurance payouts. The Civil War had been grinding on for 2 years, by 1863. The Union Army was hemorrhaging men. President Abraham Lincoln needed bodies, and in March of that year, Congress passed the Enrollment Act, the first federal draft in American history. Every male citizen between 20 and 45 was eligible. There was one escape clause. If you could pay $300, you could buy your way out. $300. To put that in perspective, the average working man in New York earned roughly $1 a day. $300 was nearly a full year's wages. The message was clear. Rich men stayed home. Poor men died. And the Irish, who were not yet citizens and therefore could not even vote on the law that was forcing them to fight, were particularly enraged. There was one more detail that mattered specifically to the Black Joke. Volunteer firemen had always been exempt from the state militia draft. It was the trade-off. You fight fires, You do not have to fight wars. But the Enrollment Act was a federal draft, not a state draft, and the exemption did not apply. When the first round of names was drawn on Saturday, July 11th, 1863, the names of several Black Joke members appeared on the list, including their captain. The first day of the draft passed without major incident. 1,200 names were drawn. The city held its breath. But over the weekend, rage spread through the working-class neighborhoods of Manhattan like fire through a tenement. By Monday morning, it was no longer about the draft. It was about everything. The $300 exemption, the racial tensions between Irish workers and free black laborers competing for the same jobs, the war itself, and for the men of Black Joke Engine Company number 33, it was about one specific thing. They were being sent to die in a war they did not start, for a country that had not even given them citizenship, while rich men sat in their parlors counting money. What happened next defines the Black Joke forever. Monday, July 13th, Peter Masterson and his brothers John and William led a group of Black Joke men down to the 9th District Provost Marshal's office at 3rd Avenue and 47th Street. They were joined by a growing crowd. By 10:30 in the morning, roughly 500 people surrounded the building. A pistol shot rang out. The Black Joke men burst through the doors, smashed the draft selection wheel, scattered the records, and set the building ablaze. But here is the detail that separates this story from a simple tale of mob violence. Fire Chief John Decker, the last chief of the old volunteer department, arrived at the scene. And Peter Masterson, the man who had just led the charge into the building, helped Decker clear a passage through the mob so that Black Joke's own engine could pump water and prevent the fire from spreading to neighboring tenements. They started the fire. Then they put it out. The same men. The same hour. That is not the behavior of a mindless mob. That is the behavior of men who understood exactly what they were doing, who had a specific target, and who drew a line when the destruction threatened people who had nothing to do with the draft. But the crowd did not draw any such line. What the Black Joke started as a targeted protest exploded into 4 days of the worst urban violence America has ever seen. The mob grew to tens of thousands. They turned on the city itself. The pro-war New York Tribune was attacked. An armory was ransacked. Telegraph lines were torn down. Rail tracks were ripped up. And then the mob turned on black New Yorkers. By 4 in the afternoon on that first day, a crowd of several thousand reached the Colored Orphan Asylum on 5th Avenue and 43rd Street. 233 children lived there, orphans. The youngest were toddlers. The mob looted the building, stripping it of food, clothing, and supplies. Then they set it on fire. Fire Chief Decker rushed to the scene with his men. He tried to break through the rioters. They outnumbered him. He tried again, coming at the building from 3 different sides, trying to confuse the crowd. The mob turned on him. They threatened to kill him. Decker walked up the steps of the burning orphanage, looked out at 2,000 rioters, and told them that it would be a disgrace to humanity and to the city of New York to destroy a building whose only purpose was benevolence. They ignored him. They set the fire again. Decker's men put it out. The mob rushed Decker with the intent to kill him. His firefighters surrounded him and told the crowd they would not take their chief except over their dead bodies. Decker and 15 of his men were physically thrown into the street. The orphanage burned. The children survived. Staff members had evacuated them through a back entrance. But the image of what happened at 5th Avenue and 43rd Street became the defining atrocity of the draft riots, and it all traced back to what began that morning at the Provost Marshal's office. What the Black Joke started. For 4 days, Manhattan burned. Rioters lynched black men from lampposts. They drowned people in the rivers. They burned down homes, businesses, churches. Police Superintendent John Kennedy was beaten so badly he was unrecognizable. Soldiers arriving from the Gettysburg Campaign were ordered to fire into crowds. By Thursday, July 16th, federal troops and state militia finally restored order. The official death toll was listed at 119. Historians believe the true number was far higher. Some estimates range as high as 1,200. And here is the part that makes this story impossibly complicated. While the riots raged, many of the Black Joke men turned against the mob. The same company that had sparked the insurrection spent the following days fighting the fires set by rioters and protecting citizens from violence. They were not alone. Firefighters from companies across the city defied the rioters at tremendous personal risk. Decker himself nearly died multiple times. At one point during the riots, a group of men tried to hang him. Just before the rope went taut, Decker told them they might stop his draft, but they could not stop the government's drafts. His men rescued him at the last possible moment. The draft riots ended, but the volunteer fire system did not survive them. The insurance industry, which had been paying claims on buildings that burned while fire companies fought each other instead of fires, had finally had enough. The political establishment, embarrassed by the chaos, had enough. And 2 years later, on August 1st, 1865, the state legislature created the Metropolitan Fire Department. Paid professionals, centralized command, no more gangs with water pumps. On that day, professional firefighters walked into every volunteer firehouse in New York City and told the volunteers to leave. The era of the fighting fire companies was over. Boss Tweed, who had risen from his red-shirted days with the Big Six to become the most powerful man in New York, lost one of the pillars of his political machine. Peter Masterson faded from history. John Decker, the last chief of the volunteers, locked his office door for the final time on the night of August 31st, 1865. His last fire had been at a stable on Mulberry Street. He went home and never came back. The story of the Black Joke Engine Company number 33 reveals something that most histories of the gangs of New York era never touch. The line between protector and predator was not just blurry. It did not exist. The same men who ran into burning buildings to save strangers would set those buildings on fire if the political price was right. The same men who beat know-nothing marchers bloody on the Bowery would defend Irish orphans with their lives. The same company that ignited the deadliest urban riot in American history would spend the rest of that week trying to put it out. Martin Scorsese understood some of this. In his 2002 film Gangs of New York, there is a scene where rival fire companies arrive at a burning building and immediately attack each other instead of the flames. It is one of the most historically accurate scenes in the film, but the Black Joke itself appears only as a fleeting reference. A single line of dialogue. Someone shouts about the Black Joke arriving, and the scene moves on. One line. For a company that started the worst riot in American history, the volunteer fire system lasted from the colonial era through 1865, over 150 years. During that time, thousands of men served in companies like the Black Joke, Peterson, Live Oak, and the Big Six. They saved countless lives. They destroyed countless others. They built political empires and burned real ones to the ground. They were the original first responders, and they were also the original organized crime networks. Every modern institution in New York City, from the fire department to the police department to the political machinery of Tammany Hall, grew from the chaos these men created and the order that had to be imposed to control them. Black Joke Engine Company number 33 started as a barge in the harbor, fighting fires on ships. It ended as the spark that burned a city. The men who pulled the ropes of that engine wanted three things: respect, power, and the right to be left alone. They got the first two. The third one killed them. Today, Engine Company 33 still exists. It operates out of a firehouse at 42 Great Jones Street in NoHo. The men and women who serve there are professionals. They are paid. They do not fight rival companies. They do not set fires for political gain. They do not beat people in the streets. But the number on the truck is the same, 33. And if you know the history, every time that engine rolls past, you are looking at a ghost. The ghost of the Black Joke. The firemen who became arsonists. The protectors who became destroyers. The most dangerous fire company New York City ever produced. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We drop new untold histories every week. Drop a comment below. Should the black joke have gotten its own chapter in the Gangs of New York film? Or is this a story that is too complicated for Hollywood? Tell me what you think.